When we think of the plague, we usually picture packed medieval cities, rats and fleas spreading the disease from house to house. For a long time, the scientific rule of thumb was simple: widespread epidemics need massive crowds. The assumption was that humanity didn't suffer from lethal outbreaks until we started farming, settling down, and living right on top of each other. But let's leave the crowded medieval streets and travel to the freezing, wind-swept shores of Lake Baikal in Siberia, about 5,500 years ago. The people living here were highly mobile hunter-gatherers. They traveled in small family units, hunting local game across a massive open landscape. There were no crowded streets or crammed housing. Yet when scientists recently extracted ancient DNA from the teeth of these isolated hunters, they found unmistakable traces of the plague bacterium. Finding the world's most notorious disease in a scattered, ancient population shows us that lethal outbreaks didn't wait for humanity to build cities to start taking a toll. Think of this ancient bacteria like a software program in its beta testing phase. We can call it Plague 1.0. The version of the plague that later devastated Europe had downloaded a crucial update. It picked up a specific gene that allowed the bacteria to survive inside the stomach of a flea. But Plague 1.0 lacked this entirely. Without it, the bacteria couldn't use fleas as a taxi service. Instead, these ancient hunters likely caught the disease by handling infected animals, like local marmots, or by breathing in the bacteria directly from a sick family member. What Plague 1.0 did have was a piece of legacy code inherited from its ancestors, a specific toxin that works like a biological bypass. Normally, your immune cells act like careful security guards, checking for threats before sounding an alarm. This toxin bypasses those checks. It forcefully clamps a white blood cell directly onto a docking port on another part of the body's defense system, triggering a massive, chaotic release of warning chemicals. This internal flood of alarm signals is so violent that it damages the body's own organs. And because children have immune systems that are still learning the ropes, they are far more likely to get caught in this chaotic reaction. Even without the ability to hide inside fleas, this early version of the plague was already a highly specialized, deadly pathogen. This is a map showing the layout of the Ust-Ida Cemetery, an ancient burial site near Lake Baikal. The outlines represent the graves of the hunter-gatherers. Normally in these sites, we see adults buried individually, spread out over time as people passed away from old age or accidents. But scattered among them here are several large shared pits. This graphic links the physical graves to genetic family trees reconstructed from the ancient DNA. It shows that the people buried together in those shared pits were close biological relatives. This specific section highlights grave 19 at a nearby site. Inside were 3 young girls, cousins between the ages of 4 and 9. The genetic analysis confirmed that all 3 were infected with the plague. Digging a grave into the frozen Siberian earth takes massive physical effort. Placing multiple family members into a single pit means they all died within a few days of each other, leaving the surviving relatives to bury them all at once. Across these specific burial sites, an unusually high number of the victims were young children, aligning perfectly with how that ancient toxin attacks a growing body. These silent family plots show us exactly what an outbreak looked like 5 millennia ago. A rapid wave of illness that swept through a family unit and devastated their youngest members. This evolutionary tree tracks the genetic history of the plague bacterium. Node B marks the point where these ancient Siberian strains split off, proving that lethal plague emerged more than 5,700 years ago. We often tell ourselves a story that mass epidemics are a modern problem, a consequence of packing together into dense agricultural cities. The evidence from Siberia shows that deadly infectious diseases have been tracking humanity for much longer, quietly hunting small, isolated bands of people moving through the wilderness. Even while facing a terrifying and sudden wave of death, these families still took the time to carefully bury their loved ones together, honoring their traditions. Long before it had the genetic tools to cause the Black Death, this early version of the bacteria was already capable of wiping out an entire generation of a family in a matter of days. By examining these ancient remains, we see that the story of the plague didn't start with the Black Death. It is an ancient, ongoing competition between us and the world's most infamous pathogen, one that began long before the first city was ever built.